I'm 62 years old, and last week, my own son slammed a door in my face. I never imagined Ethan, the boy I once held through storms and sickness, would one day look at me as if I were a burden he needed to throw out with the trash. I arrived at his house in a wheelchair, exhausted, desperate, and still grieving the husband I'd lost. Instead of compassion, he gave me coldness sharper than any winter wind. I spent that night alone on a bus stop bench, clutching nothing but a worn-out handbag and an old metal card belonging to my late husband, Charles. I didn't even know why I kept it, maybe for comfort, maybe for memory. But when morning arrived and I finally dragged myself into the bank, everything changed. The manager's eyes widened. His hands shook. He stood so fast his chair toppled over behind him. "Ma'am," he whispered, you need to see this." And in that moment, my entire world flipped, and so would my son's. My name is Lorraine Whitley. I'm 62 years old, and the day I needed my son the most was the day he treated me like a stranger. My wheelchair rattled as I rolled up his front path, hoping for kindness, maybe even a hug, after weeks of struggling alone since my husband Charles passed. Instead, Ethan opened the door with a startled frown, as though my presence inconvenienced him. I explained my situation gently, the broken heater in my apartment, my worsening leg pain, the loneliness. But he barely listened. His eyes darted past me, toward the driveway, like he hoped neighbors wouldn't see me. It was the first moment I truly felt the distance between the boy I raised and the man standing in front of me. Desperate for a shred of compassion, I turned to Mara, Ethan's wife, who appeared behind him with her arms folded tightly. "Just one night," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I have nowhere else to go." Mara bent down slightly, pretending to seem sympathetic, but her eyes were cold and calculating. She leaned close to Ethan and whispered something sharp enough that I saw his jaw tighten. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew they weren't in my favor. She gave him a small, dismissive nod, as though my fate were a simple household decision. At that moment, it hit me that I wasn't speaking to my family anymore, just two people deciding whether I was worth the inconvenience. Ethan stepped fully outside, blocking the doorway like a barrier. He inhaled as if gathering the courage to say something difficult, but instead of empathy, he delivered cruelty with stunning ease. "Mom, I can't support dead weight," he said, glancing pointedly at my wheelchair. The words sliced through me like winter wind. I opened my mouth to respond, but no sound came out, only shock. He lifted his hands defensively as though I was the one overstepping. He said, "We have our own life, our own bills. You can't just show up and expect to stay." His tone carried annoyance, not concern, and behind him, Morris smirked ever so slightly, confident she'd won whatever unspoken argument had taken place. It was clear I wasn't wanted. I tried one last time. "Ethan, I'm your mother." The words escaped in a shaky whisper. He didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped back, muttering something about boundaries, and slowly pushed the door shut. My hand, frail and trembling, lifted instinctively to stop it, but he didn't even notice. The door closed just inches from my fingers, the same fingers that once spoon-fed him, buttoned his coats, and wiped away his tears. Now they hovered uselessly in the cold air. The slam echoed down the porch, louder than it should have been, final and merciless. I sat there in my wheelchair, staring at the wood grain of the door that separated me from the child I once believed would always protect me. The sun sank quickly, leaving the street dim and unfamiliar as I rolled away from Ethan's house. I didn't know where to go. I just kept moving until I reached a bus stop bench under a flickering street lamp. The concrete bit into my wheels, and the cold crept into my bones. People passed by, some glanced, most didn't, and not one offered help. I hugged my thin sweater around myself, trying to stay warm as hours dragged by. My legs throbbed, my back ached, and my eyes stung from crying. But I swallowed the sobs because no one cared enough to hear them. It was the longest night of my life, sitting alone like discarded furniture, invisible to the world. Around midnight, I opened my battered handbag in search of a tissue and felt the edge of something metallic. I pulled out an old, scratched card. Charles's card, the one he'd kept locked away in a drawer I rarely touched. I'd taken it after he died, not knowing why, maybe just to feel close to him. For a moment, I considered throwing it away. It was probably expired or empty. But something stopped me. I turned it over in my hand, remembering how secretive Charles had been about certain financial matters. He always said he wanted to protect me, though I never understood from what. Holding the card now, alone in the cold, I wondered if he'd tried to protect me, even from our own son. When dawn finally arrived, soft gray light spilling over the street, I felt as if I'd aged 10 years overnight. My body was stiff, my eyes swollen. But I knew I couldn't spend another day like this. I needed answers, and perhaps the card would give me some. So I pushed myself toward Winslow Bank, the nearest building that might still have records of anything Charles once owned. I didn't expect miracles. I didn't even expect the card to scan. I simply hoped someone might help me find a temporary solution, or at least give me somewhere warm to sit. Little did I know, walking into that bank would not only change my life, it would resurrect a truth my husband had hidden for years. Lorraine pushed herself through the glass doors of Winslow Bank, her arms aching from the night spent on a cold bench. The building's warmth wrapped around her like a blanket, but it didn't erase the exhaustion in her bones. A few employees glanced at her with polite pity, the kind reserved for customers they assume are about to request a small withdrawal or ask for help with an overdraft fee. Lorraine approached the counter slowly, feeling out of place among polished floors and crisp suits. She explained she had an old card from her late husband and wasn't sure if it still worked. The teller nodded and called the manager, a man who barely glanced up as he approached. Lorraine braced herself for disappointment, unaware her life was 30 seconds away from changing forever. Declan Morwood, the bank manager, took the metal card from Lorraine with the casual indifference of a man who handled dozens of outdated accounts every week. He inserted it into the terminal while continuing to answer an email on his computer. Lorraine sat silently, watching his fingers tap impatiently, convinced he would soon return the card with an apologetic smile and tell her the account was closed or empty. But then Declan froze. His fingers stopped mid-air, hovering above the keyboard. His eyes narrowed at the screen, leaned forward, and then widened in disbelief. Slowly, he turned his head toward Lorraine, his posture suddenly stiff. The air between them shifted, heavy and alert. Whatever he saw on that monitor wasn't normal, and it wasn't small. Without warning, Declan shot up from his seat so quickly that his office chair rolled backward and toppled over with a loud crash. The sudden sound startled everyone around them, drawing curious glances from nearby employees. Declan didn't seem to notice. His entire focus was fixed on Lorraine, his expression a mix of shock and urgency. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me," he said, his voice lower and far more serious than before. He grabbed the card as if it were something fragile and precious, motioning for her to follow him toward a private office in the back. Lorraine's heart pounded, partly from fear, partly from confusion. What could possibly be hidden inside that card to make a bank manager react like that? Once inside the private office, Declan closed the door gently, almost ceremonially, as though sealing them away from the rest of the world. He sat down, swallowed hard, and turned the computer screen toward Lorraine. "Ma'am, you need to see this." Her breath caught as her eyes landed on the number glowing on the screen, $33 million. For a moment, she wondered if the monitor was broken or if her tired mind was playing tricks on her. Declan shook his head before she could speak, confirming it was real. The account belonged solely to Charles Whitley, her Charles, and it had been untouched for years. Lorraine felt the room tilt, memories of her late husband flooding her, his quiet reassurance, his mysterious late nights, and now this staggering secret he'd left behind. Declan took a deep breath and reached into a locked drawer, pulling out a sealed envelope with her husband's neat handwriting across the front. For Lorraine, to be given only upon account activation. The sight of Charles's handwriting made her throat tighten. Declan explained that Charles had instructed the bank to hold the letter until the card was used again, a detail no one had questioned at the time. He handed it to her, gently, as if passing her a living memory. Lorraine tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a single page, heavy with emotion and secrets. A message from a man who had loved her enough to plan for a future she never knew existed. The letter unfolded like a confession from beyond the grave. Charles wrote that he had noticed Ethan's behavior changing years earlier. The entitlement, the manipulation, the subtle greed growing behind every request for money. Fearing their son would one day take advantage of her, Charles created a separate estate account and hid it until she truly needed protection. He apologized for keeping such a large secret, but insisted it was the only way to keep her safe. "If Ethan ever shows you cruelty," the letter read, "know that I saw it coming, and I built this safety so you'd never be at his mercy." Tears blurred her vision as she clutched the letter, realizing Charles had seen the betrayal long before she ever suspected it. Declan cleared his throat and informed Lorraine that with the card's use, the account had officially transferred to her name in accordance with Charles's instructions. She blinked in disbelief. She, who had spent last night freezing on a bench, was now the owner of a multi-million-dollar estate. Declan began explaining the paperwork, legal protocols, and steps needed to secure the funds, but his voice felt distant, drowned by the weight of this new reality. Her life had changed in a single morning. The humiliation of yesterday now stood in stark contrast to the power she suddenly held. As Declan prepared the transfer documents, Lorraine made a silent promise to herself. She would never again beg for anyone's kindness, especially not her son's. While Ethan was standing in line at a nearby cafe, he overheard two bank employees chatting about a massive dormant account that had suddenly activated that morning. They mentioned a widow, a metal card, and a manager who nearly knocked over his chair in shock. Ethan's ears perked up instantly. He knew his father's finances better than he admitted, and the description matched Lorraine too closely to ignore. His mind raced with possibilities. Inheritance, hidden savings, maybe something Charles had stashed away. Greed flickered behind his eyes. Instead of concern, he felt opportunity. If his mother had stumbled onto money, he wanted control of it before she even realized what she had. That rumor planted a seed he couldn't ignore. Driven by curiosity and entitlement, Ethan stormed into Winslow Bank, demanding answers from anyone who would listen. He loudly claimed he was worried about his mother, pretending to be a protective son searching for her financial safety. But his tone was more commanding than caring, and the staff quickly sensed something off. Declan Morwood recognized Ethan immediately and kept his expression neutral, refusing to disclose anything. Ethan grew increasingly agitated, insisting he needed access to family accounts, and implying that his mother wasn't mentally sound enough to handle money. His performance was sloppy, desperate, and transparent. Declan carefully avoided revealing Lorraine's presence, knowing that allowing Ethan near her now would lead to trouble, likely the exact kind her husband had feared. Declan discreetly slipped into his office and quietly informed Lorraine that her son was in the lobby asking aggressive questions. Her stomach twisted, not from fear, but from disappointment so deep it felt like a bruise inside her chest. Declan guided her through a side hallway normally used by employees, avoiding the main floor entirely. They exited through a discreet service door that led to the parking lot, the cool air hitting her face like a warning. As she rolled forward in her wheelchair, she knew Ethan wasn't searching for her out of concern. He'd sensed money. She could feel it. The bank's quiet back exit became a symbolic passage, the moment she stepped away from her son's deceit and into her own protection. Back home, Ethan recounted the situation to Mara, who listened with narrowed eyes and a calculating stillness. The moment he mentioned a possible hidden fortune, her demeanor changed entirely. She leaned forward, her voice low and strategic, suggesting that they needed to play nice with Lorraine before someone else influenced her. Mara warned Ethan that if his mother gained control of significant assets, she might cut them out entirely, unless they convinced her she still needed them. Her plan was manipulative and cold. Show remorse, act loving, and push Lorraine into signing over financial authority. Ethan hesitated briefly, guilt flickering for a moment, but Mara's confidence hardened his resolve. Together they formed a plan rooted in false affection and calculated greed. Later that evening, Ethan arrived at the shelter where Lorraine was temporarily staying. He walked in holding a bouquet of discount flowers and wearing an expression of exaggerated remorse. His voice trembled, but not with emotion, only with effort, as he forced tears that refused to come. He apologized for misunderstanding her needs, claiming he'd been stressed and overwhelmed. Lorraine listened quietly, studying the familiar manipulative patterns she had ignored for years. His sudden kindness felt rehearsed, every sentence dripping with intention rather than sincerity. When he asked if they could talk privately about things, she recognized the real purpose behind his visit. For the first time, she didn't fall for it. She simply nodded, allowing him to reveal more of his own duplicity. That night, Lorraine sat alone with her husband's letter spread across her lap. Charles's words echoed through her mind. If Ethan chooses cruelty, protect yourself. It felt as if he had written the line knowing exactly what would unfold. He replayed Ethan's fake apology, the sudden sweetness, the forced concern, all of it aligning perfectly with Charles's warnings. The realization struck her hard. Her husband had seen the danger in Ethan long before she did, and now everything he predicted was happening in real time. Instead of heartbreak, Lorraine felt something new rising inside her, strength. If Ethan wanted to manipulate her, he would discover a truth he never expected. She wasn't the same vulnerable woman he'd abandoned at his doorstep. Determined to protect herself and honor Charles's foresight, Lorraine contacted Rowan Ellister, a sharp, discreet attorney known for safeguarding vulnerable clients. Rowan listened carefully to her story, the rejection, the card, the letter, and the sudden inheritance, and immediately recognized the danger Ethan posed. Together, they crafted a legal and financial shield around her, new account protections, private documentation, and confidentiality orders preventing anyone from accessing her information. Rowan assured her that as long as she followed his guidance, Ethan would never control a single dollar of her estate. For the first time in years, Lorraine felt secure, not because of money, but because she finally had someone in her corner who wasn't pretending. The first move in her rise had begun. Ethan Whitley felt his stomach collapse when he watched the breaking news clip showing his mother, Lorraine Whitley, stepping confidently out of a bank car with 2 security officers at her side. Reporters shouted questions about her sudden claim to a $33 million account left behind by her late husband, Charles Whitley. Ethan replayed the video 3 times, unable to breathe as he realized what this meant. The woman he had kicked out, coldly, cruelly, without hesitation, was now wealthier and more powerful than he had ever imagined. His wife Mara hovered behind him, whispering fears about the inheritance, their house payments, and their lifestyle depending on Lorraine's money. Ethan snapped at her, but internally he felt panic rising like fire in his chest. If Lorraine turned against him, everything he'd built on lies could crumble overnight. Trying to salvage control, Ethan convinced Mara to join him in filming a reconciliation vlog and drive to Lorraine's temporary apartment, pretending they deeply cared for her. Mara dabbed glycerin tears under her eyes while Ethan practices lines in the rearview mirror, lines about family unity and misunderstandings he had never believed. When Lorraine opened the door, she didn't smile. She didn't even greet them warmly. She simply stared at the camera in Ethan's hand. Mara rushed forward, hugging her dramatically, while Ethan recorded every second. "Mom, we just want you back home," he said sweetly, though the words tasted like poison. Lorraine stepped aside and allowed them in, her eyes distant. She recognized the performance instantly. This wasn't love. This was damage control. As soon as they sat down, Ethan hit record again. He began telling a fabricated story about Lorraine being emotionally unstable, claiming she often ran away from home and that he and Mara had supported her through every episode. Mara chimed in with trembling lips, saying they had begged Lorraine to stay, but she refused, painting themselves as devoted, exhausted caretakers. Lorraine sat silently, letting the lies pile up like rotting garbage. Ethan spoke confidently, believing the camera would shift public sympathy back toward him. But as he ended the recording and smiled triumphantly, Lorraine calmly reached into her purse and placed a small audio device on the table. Ethan's smirk faded instantly. "What is that?" he asked, his voice cracking. Lorraine didn't answer. She pressed play. The room filled with Ethan's
Ethan's unfiltered cruelty, his own voice snarled from the speaker, "Get out of my house! You're useless! Go be someone else's problem!"
The sound of Lorraine's cane hitting the floor echoed, followed by the slam of the door Ethan had shut in her face. Mara covered her mouth, horrified, realizing their entire performance had just been shattered by undeniable evidence. Ethan lunged forward to grab the device, but Lorraine tightened her grip, staring him down with a strength he didn't recognize. "I recorded everything," she said softly. "Rowan asked me to protect myself." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. Every lie he had recorded minutes ago was now worthless. His manipulation had just self-destructed. 2 days later, Attorney Rowan arranged a formal meeting in his office. Ethan and Mara walked in looking shaken and exhausted, while Lorraine sat calmly at the head of the table, holding a sealed envelope written in Charles Whitley's handwriting. Rowan nodded for her to begin. Lorraine slowly opened the letter and read aloud. Charles had anticipated Ethan's greed, feared his tendency toward cruelty, and left strict instructions ensuring Lorraine would receive full control of his estate. He wrote that he trusted her judgment, not Ethan's entitlement. As the words echoed through the room, Ethan's face crumpled. Mara squeezed his hand tightly, but he barely felt it. Charles had known the truth all along. Every hope Ethan had clung to evaporated with each sentence his father had written years earlier. When Lorraine finished reading, Rowan placed several legal documents in front of Ethan. "These are asset protection orders. You are barred from accessing or benefiting from any part of Lorraine Whitley's estate. Any attempt to interfere financially or emotionally will result in immediate legal action." Ethan tried to argue, but Rowan opened a folder containing timestamps, audio recordings, witness statements, and a written summary of Ethan's treatment of his mother. Mara looked like she might faint. Lorraine watched quietly, not angry, just tired, relieved, and resolute. Ethan signed the papers with trembling hands. For the first time in his life, the consequences he always escaped had finally found him, and there was no way out. As the meeting ended, Ethan lingered awkwardly near the doorway, eyes red, voice low. "Mom, can we fix this?" he whispered. Lorraine stood, her cane steady, her posture stronger than he'd ever seen. "Ethan," she said, gently but firmly, "you didn't just reject me once. You rejected me every time I needed you. And now, I'm choosing peace." Ethan swallowed hard, realizing the door was closing, not because she wanted revenge, but because she had finally chosen herself. Lorraine walked past him with quiet dignity, stepping into Rowan's waiting car. As the door shut, she exhaled a long, steady breath. The past no longer controlled her. She wasn't the woman begging on his doorstep anymore. She was free.
Stay with me, because what comes next changes everything. And if you're following Helena's journey, make sure you subscribe before we continue. Lorraine Wheatley stood before the quiet lakeside home she had purchased that morning. A place wrapped in soft sunlight and birdsong, nothing like the cold hallways she had once been thrown out of. The wooden porch creaked under her feet as if welcoming her with open arms. Inside, the room smelled faintly of pine, untouched, and waiting for her new life to begin. She set down the keys on the kitchen counter and breathed deeply, realizing she finally had a place where no one could insult her, dismiss her, or treat her like a burden. This home wasn't luxury for display. It was proof she survived. She walked to the back deck, watching the lake shimmer, and whispered, "I deserve this. I really do." The next day, Lorraine met with attorneys and social workers to establish the Whitley Shelter Fund, a project dedicated to elderly individuals who had been abandoned by their families just like she once was. She explained her vision: warm housing, meals, counseling, and legal support for seniors treated as disposable. The team listened, inspired by her calm determination and the strength behind her voice. She used a portion of her newfound wealth to launch the first phase immediately, refusing to let bureaucracy slow her mission. Lorraine knew she couldn't erase the pain she lived through, but she could transform it into protection for others. When she signed the founding documents, her hands didn't tremble. They were steady, confident, and proud. Necklin Rhodes, the financial specialist who helped uncover the hidden assets,
Arrived at her new home with a structured plan. He suggested creating a long-term protective trust that would grow large enough to support thousands of vulnerable seniors across the country.
Lorraine listened carefully as he outlined yearly projections, safety measures, and ways to ensure no one could misuse the funds. She admired his sincerity. He spoke not like a banker seeking profit, but like a man genuinely moved by her resilience. When he asked if she was ready for her name to become a symbol of hope, Lorraine paused, then nodded with quiet certainty. She agreed to build something bigger than both of them, something that would outlive every betrayal she had ever faced. Ethan Whiteley and his wife, Mara, tried to save face by claiming Lorraine had manipulated her way into the inheritance. They filed a lawsuit, hoping the court would freeze her assets. But when investigators pulled up the evidence, the footage of Ethan screaming at her, the messages mocking her health, and financial records proving he had tried to seize her late husband Charles's accounts illegally, the case collapsed instantly. Mara attempted to shift blame, but the court saw through her performance. Their friends abandoned them, neighbors avoided them, and Ethan lost his job within a week. Lorraine heard the verdict with a steady heart. She wasn't celebrating. Justice had simply arrived on its own schedule. The controversy exploded online when someone leaked Ethan and Mara's staged videos, clips where they pretended to be carrying children while mocking Lorraine off camera. Once the truth came out, the internet turned against them with furious sympathy for Lorraine. Headlines spread nationwide. Mother banished by her own son uses inheritance to save others. Lorraine declined all interview requests, choosing dignity over attention. She issued one calm statement through Declan. No parent deserves humiliation in their final years. Her message went viral, touching millions. Strangers mailed her letters, flowers, and donations for her new fund. For the first time in her life, the world didn't see her as a burden. They saw her as courage, wrapped in kindness. One evening, Lorraine sat on her lakeside porch with a pen and a quiet heart. She began writing a letter to her late husband, Charles Whiteley, telling him how she had used the inheritance he left, not for revenge, but for rebuilding lives. She described the house, the fund, the trust, and even Declan's unwavering support. She admitted how deeply she missed Charles's gentle voice, especially on nights when the past still stung. But as she wrote, she realized she had become stronger than she ever imagined. She thanked him for believing in her even after death, for leaving her the tools to rise. When she finished, she pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes in peace. At dawn, Lorraine stepped outside, the lake glowing gold beneath the rising sun. She stood barefoot on the wooden deck, feeling the cool air brush against her skin like a quiet promise. Her life was no longer defined by rejection, cruelty, or being cast aside. She had rebuilt herself into someone unshakable, someone with a purpose larger than pain. The Whitley Shelter Fund was days from opening its first doors, and she planned to greet every resident personally. Lorraine whispered into the bright morning, "I was thrown out like nothing, but I rebuilt everything." She smiled, finally free from the shadows of betrayal. Her story of suffering had ended. Her story of power had only just begun.